Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolors. Thank you for joining me in another quickie video. Today we're gonna look at this portrait of my friend Gooch. So this is my friend Eric, same name as me, who I used to work with, but we all like to call him by his last name, which is Gooch. Both his face and his personality has quite a bit of character, and that's why I decided to paint him. And back in the time, I haven't painted an older fellow before, so I thought this is the perfect chance to do so. This portrait was one of the most fun portrait painting I've done. Part of the reason is because I don't have the pressure to make him look pretty. An older guy gives me more room to make things a bit rougher and push the color and detail a little bit more, as opposed to painting a young, beautiful girl, which I always need to be mindful not to make her face look too rough. And with too much detail and contrast, a young girl's face will start to look old. But for an older guy, I don't really have that restriction and I don't really have that pressure. The drawing is a big part of the painting, so you can see me constantly measuring the proportion of the face. The proportion and the structure have to be correct in order to make the portrait look believable. If I'm painting a landscape, I won't have to be so careful and accurate, but for a human face, sometimes a little bit off can make the whole face look weird, or just simply fail to capture the likeness of the person. So I spent quite a bit of time doing the drawing. It is boring and tedious, but it is not something to skimp on. It is just as important, if not more, than the actual painting. So I hope you're having a good 2018 so far. Since last year, my YouTube channel has tremendous growth thanks to you. I have more videos planning to make this year. The online course was going very well. People are loving it, and I have more course content to add into it as well. So if you haven't, be sure to check it out on my website, cafewatercolor.com. I'm also planning to release another course maybe by the end of this year. It will be focusing on portrait painting. It will cover from the very basic head drawing, proportion, structure, each facial feature, to lighting and shadow, and then paint it with watercolor. Actually, I'm interested in what is your thought on the portrait painting course. So if you are interested, let me know on the comment section down below. So on to the first wash. I start from the nose with quite a bit of red and swirl the brush outward, and while it's still wet, I start to give it some color variation. A bit cooler on the left and warmer on the right. The photo reference has a nice soft and natural light, but you can still see the warm sunlight is mostly from the right, while the shadow side of his face has more of a cooler ambient light to it. It is subtle, but you can push the warm and cool in your painting a little bit more than a photo reference. After the first wash is dry, I started to paint the second layer, starting from the eyes, the shadow of the eyelid, the iris, and the corner of the eyes. Now, even though we are painting an older person here, doesn't mean I'm starting to paint all the wrinkles that I see in a bunch of little lines. They are just form changing and turning, so there's just some additional light and dark. The most important thing is still the overall structural value. So as you can see, I'm just focusing on painting the dark area of the eye socket with some emphasis on the darker wrinkle, and that's it. Now onto the right eye, which is the same process. This almost feels like sculpting and modeling on a 2D surface, because I'm not really tracing the shape as much as I am bringing out the forms. And this reminds me of a story that I heard about the great Renaissance sculptor, Michelangelo. Someone asked him, how did you do that? How did you make such a beautiful sculpture from a formless rock? And Michelangelo replied, the form is already in the rock. I'm just taking it out. I think the same goes for the portrait painting. We paint on a 2D flat surface, but we are painting the 3-dimensional form out from it. The nose is casting a very soft cast shadow to the left. Since his face is not lit by direct sunlight, the shadows are mostly very soft, and I like this type of lighting for watercolor portrait. It makes the face look more natural and colorful, instead of very harsh and contrasty. Here I start to paint the tip of the nose. Gooch has a wonderful looking nose that's very interesting to paint, so I had a lot of fun with that. I make the tip of the nose a lot warmer and redder. When you do that, it will usually project out and pop out of the 2D space. One thing to notice is that I often drop a good amount of paint down and come back with a damp brush to soften the edge. Hard and soft edges are very important in portrait. If you have hard edges everywhere, the face will look too harsh, and if you have soft edges everywhere, the face starts to look like a mush, and it can actually look pretty dirty because you're scraping and messing around with the clean wash too much. So know where you need to soften the edge and do it very cleanly. Onto the lips. The thing about lips is that don't just start to paint the shape of the lip and make it end up looking like the person is wearing the lipstick. Still try to look for the form of the lip and model it out. Flatness is your greatest enemy in portrait. The moment you're starting to just copy and trace the shape you see, the face will fall flat. Sorry for the pun. So rather than just trace the shape, really understand the structure and paint the structure out. Bring out the form, the 3-dimensional quality to it. Now I start to work on his chin. A big part of his chin is covered by his beard, but you can still clearly see how the form's turning from dark to light under his lips, and that is something I definitely need to get it in. And also because he's sort of smiling, so his mouth sort of pushes the muscle on the side of his cheek, so it creates some nice interesting shadows. Now I move up to the bridge of the nose and I paint the subtle cast shadow by the glasses frame. This is the stage I started to go down into the detail. looking for areas that needs a bit more dark punches and bring out the form even more. I started to look at detailed cast shadow causing by the glasses frame. When you start to do this type of cast shadow, be very mindful where the shadow is casting from and what form is it casting on. It should be following the form of the face to make it look more dimensional. If you paint it wrong, you can break the form. But if you do those correctly, they can really add a lot of authenticity to your portrait. And it can really shows your understanding of form and lighting. Make the tip of the nose a little bit more red because the color fades off quite a bit. Saunders paper tend to do that a little bit, so I find myself needing to go back and to compensate it a little bit more from time to time. But Saunders is still one of my favorite paper to paint on. So I do a dark glaze on his neck. I try to keep it simple so the focus will be still on his face, but the neck needs to be darker because it's in the shadow, and also I need the face to pop out even more. Now I start to paint the hair. I try to keep the hair simple. The face is still the most important focus of the painting, so the hair and everything else takes a back seat. Know where your focus is and don't let other things you do compete with it. And I also like to push the color a little bit more when it comes to hair, because hair is a very big part of a portrait, and if I paint just single color for that person's hair because that is what I see, it's gonna be end up looking really dead. So in this case, I add some warm and cool color just to play around with the color a little bit. And as long as the value is correct, the hair will still looks pretty good. And I like to bring the value of the hair out into the background, so it sort of connect into each other, so the hair sort of fades in nicely into the atmosphere. Giving some background and start working on his shirt. Just some simple dark shape and leave the bottom sort of unfinished and it'll be fine. His dark shirt actually very nicely that his face pops out even more. And we need this sort of dark value down there, a very simple dark shape to just anchor the whole painting down. Otherwise his head feels like it's a little bit floating, and that's not what I really want for, at least for him. He's a very grounded, down-to-earth person, so I don't want him to feel like he's floating in the air. And now I move on to his glasses. Now his glasses, I'm just going to put in some really dark shape here and there to suggestive glasses. I also use a little bit of masking fluid in this portrait, just as some highlight of the glass so that I don't have to paint around some tiny little details. When you have something like this glasses here, don't just start to outline it. You can notice I kind of skip around a little bit. So here and there you can see some dark lines and it kind of lost and found. Finishing the glasses, and here you go. Here's Gooch. I really enjoyed this painting and I hope you enjoy this video as well. Be sure to check out my website at cafewatercolor.com if you haven't signed up to receive a fast-track watercolor PDF guide. I will have another longer format street scenery video very soon, So thank you for watching this one, and I will see you very soon.